Mount Everest has always been the pinnacle of human ambition, a place where legends are made, but also where dreams perish in the freezing abyss. In 1998, Frances Arsenyev set out to etch her name into history. She wanted to be the first American woman to reach Everest's summit without supplemental oxygen. She did it. She stood on top of the world, but she never made it back down. What followed was a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion, a tragic tale of separation, survival, and sacrifice. For 9 years, her lifeless body remained frozen on Everest's slopes, a haunting figure known to climbers as Sleeping Beauty. Frances was no stranger to mountains. Alongside her husband, Sergei Arsenyev, she had conquered formidable peaks, Denali, Elbrus, and many of Russia's most treacherous summits. But Everest was different. It was Everest. In May 1998, the Arsenyevs arrived at base camp, ready to take on the challenge. With no supplemental oxygen, they moved slowly, methodically, each breath a struggle. On May 22nd, they finally reached the top. The dream had come true, but the mountain does not care for dreams. They had summited too late in the day. Nightfall came, and with it, the biting cold of the death zone, the unforgiving altitude where human life begins to wither. Forced to spend another night above 8,000 meters, the couple became separated. Sergei made it back to camp. Frances did not, and so began the nightmare. As dawn broke on May 23rd, a team of Uzbek climbers encountered her high on the mountain. She was still alive, but barely. Her body was shutting down, ravaged by frostbite and oxygen deprivation. She could not move. They tried to save her, giving her what little oxygen they had, dragging her down the mountain as far as their exhausted bodies. Their strength gave out. They had no choice but to leave her behind. That evening, as they descended to camp, they saw Sergei. He was climbing back up, carrying oxygen, medicine, whatever he could. He would not abandon his wife. He would not let Everest take her. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. On May 24th, British climber Ian Woodall and South African Cathy O'Dowd were making their summit push when they stumbled upon Frances. She was still there, still alive. Her voice was weak, her words barely more than whispers carried by the wind. "Don't leave me." But there was nothing they could do. Her body was too far gone. The elements were too vicious. She was trapped in the death grip of Everest. To stay with her meant certain death. After more than an hour of futile efforts, they made the hardest decision of their lives. They left her. Frances Arsenyev died as they found her, curled on her side, clipped onto the guide rope, her face serene, as if merely asleep. Sergei's fate remained a mystery until the following year. His body was found lower on the mountain. Having fallen while trying to reach his wife, he had died alone in his final act of love. For 9 years, Frances remained there, frozen in time. Climbers passing through the north route saw her body draped in purple and blue, her face peaceful in eternal slumber. She became known as Sleeping Beauty, a ghostly reminder of Everest's merciless nature. But in 2007, Ian Woodall returned. Haunted by what he had seen, he led an expedition, the Tau of Everest, to remove her body from view. With a quiet ritual, he moved her to a lower location, away from the eyes of passing climbers. Frances Arsenyev was finally given some semblance of rest. Everest remembers all who have dared to challenge it. Some conquer it, some never leave. Frances and Sergei Arsenyev lie somewhere on its icy slopes, bound together in death as they were in life. Their story is not just one of tragedy, but of love, devotion, and the relentless will to survive. Even now, as climbers ascend the world's highest peak, their ghosts whisper in the wind. On December 11, 1994, the Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas, Nevada, was electric with anticipation. It was the final night of the National Finals Rodeo, NFR, the ultimate battleground for the world's best bull riders. Among them was Brent Thurman, a 25-year-old rising star, already carving his name into the history of the sport. Thurman wasn't just another cowboy chasing a dream. He was a founding member of the Professional Bull Riders, PBR, and a fierce competitor known for his skill, determination, and love for the sport. But on this night, fate had other plans. As he prepared for his ride, an uncharacteristic unease lingered. He turned to Aaron Seamus, a fellow rider who had previously faced the bull he was about to ride. "What do you think of Red Wolf?" he asked, his voice carrying a rare edge of uncertainty. The chute opened. Red Wolf exploded into the arena, bucking with unrelenting force. Thurman held tight, his body instinctively moving with the bull's powerful kicks and twists. The crowd roared as he hit 4 seconds, then 5. He was still in control. Then, everything changed. Thurman was thrown. Most riders know how to take a fall, how to roll away from danger, but this fall was different. His hand became tangled in his bull rope, a deadly mistake. Before he could break free, Red Wolf dragged him beneath its pounding hooves. Then, the fatal moment. 2,000 pounds of fury came crashing down onto the back of Thurman's head and neck. The arena fell silent. For a moment, a flicker of life. He lifted his head, as if trying to fight his way back, but the damage was catastrophic. His body went still. The Justin Sports Medicine team rushed in. EMTs worked frantically, loading him onto a stretcher and rushing him to University Medical Center. But the injuries, severe cranial and facial fractures, were beyond repair. Brent Thurman never regained consciousness. 6 days later, on December 17, 1994, the rodeo world received the devastating news. Brent Thurman was gone. His funeral at the Travis County Exposition Center in Austin, Texas, was a sorrowful gathering of family, friends, and fellow riders who struggled to say goodbye to a man who had once seemed unstoppable. But legends never truly die. In March 1981, Carl McCann, a 35-year-old wildlife photographer, set out on what he believed would be a solitary yet fulfilling expedition into the heart of Alaska's Brooks Range. With a passion for capturing the raw beauty of the wilderness, he arrived fully equipped, carrying 500 rolls of film, 1,400 pounds of provisions, and multiple firearms, prepared for what he thought would be an unforgettable summer. But a critical oversight would seal his fate, leaving him trapped, alone, and helpless in the unforgiving Alaskan wild. McCann, originally from Texas, was no stranger to adventure. In 1976, he'd already spent 5 months alone in the Brooks Range, an experience that likely instilled in him a sense of confidence, perhaps too much confidence. This time, however, he made one fatal miscalculation. He believed he had arranged for a friend to pick him up at summer's end, but he never confirmed his return flight. Unbeknownst to him, the pilot he had paid for plane repairs had never actually been scheduled to bring him home. As spring gave way to summer, McCann documented his journey in meticulous detail. His diary began as an awe-filled account of the thriving wildlife around him. But by August, his entries started to reveal a slow, creeping dread. "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging my departure," he wrote, an early sign that he was beginning to realize the gravity of his mistake. As the days passed and the plane never arrived, McCann's situation became increasingly dire. His supplies dwindled, and with autumn approaching, nights grew colder. He tried to stretch his rations by hunting ducks and muskrats, and even drying caribou meat from a carcass he found. Yet, despite his resourcefulness, his isolation became his greatest enemy. In late August, a glimmer of hope appeared in the sky. A small plane circled above his camp. It was an Alaska State Trooper, spotting his remote campsite. But McCann, unaware of the life or death weight of his actions, waved his orange sleeping bag casually, unknowingly signaling, "All okay, do not wait." His only chance at rescue vanished into the sky. As fall tightened its grip, McCann's journal reflected his descent from determination to desperation. Hunting became nearly impossible, as wolves and foxes competed for the little game that remained. His frostbitten hands struggled with even the most basic tasks. The cold gnawed at him relentlessly, and hunger sapped his strength. His once detailed diary entries became short, frantic scribbles, his handwriting growing shaky and uneven. By November, with no food left and his body wasting away, the thought of trekking 75 miles to Fort Yukon became a fantasy rather than a plan. His writing turned to hopelessness, his words filled with the fear of being forgotten, lost forever in the vast, empty wilderness. Near Thanksgiving, McCann described crushing weakness, dizzy spells, and relentless chills. With the last of his fuel, he lit a final fire, scrawling a farewell message in his diary. He pinned his Alaska driver's license to his last note, leaving behind instructions for his undeveloped film and a humble prayer for forgiveness. Then, in the silence of the frozen wild, he ended his own life. On February 2, 1982, a month-long search, initiated by concerned friends, led Alaska State Troopers to his camp. His tent was buried under snow, its entrance sealed by the harsh winter. Inside, they found his lifeless, emaciated body, preserved by the cold. His diary, over 100 pages long, chronicled the slow, harrowing decline of a man once filled with wonder and determination, reduced to a soul consumed by solitude and despair. The coroner's inquest would later confirm what his last pages had already revealed. Carl McCann had perished, not from the cruelty of nature, but from the crushing weight of isolation, hunger, and the realization that rescue would never come. For nearly a century, one of the greatest mysteries in mountaineering history remained unsolved. What really happened to Andrew Sandy Irvine and George Mallory on that fateful day in 1924? The two British climbers vanished into the clouds high on Everest's northeast ridge, chasing the dream of being the first to stand atop the world's highest peak. Did they make it? Or did Everest claim them before they could etch their names into history? Mallory's body was found in 1999, lying frozen in time at 8,155 meters, 26,755 feet. His skin still ghostly white from decades in the ice. But Irvine, his younger and lesser-known partner, remained missing. His absence left a void, one that fueled speculation, theories, and endless searches. Some believed he held the missing camera that could prove whether they had reached the summit before perishing. Others thought he was buried deep beneath Everest's icy grip, never to be found. Then, in October 2024, a discovery sent shockwaves through the mountaineering world. A National Geographic team, including renowned filmmaker and climber Jimmy Chin, was combing the vast frozen expanse of the central Rongbuk Glacier when something eerie emerged from the ice. A single, weathered boot. It looked ancient, its cracked leather barely clinging to the sole, studded with the steel hobnails of an era long past. They knew, in an instant, that they had stumbled upon something significant. As they drew closer, the realization struck like a lightning bolt. Inside the boot was a foot, frozen, lifeless, preserved by Everest's merciless cold. I lifted up the sock, Chin recalled, his voice laced with disbelief, and there's a red label that has A.C. Irvine stitched into it. For a moment, silence hung in the air before it shattered into pure, adrenaline-fueled chaos. The team erupted in expletives, running in circles, fully aware they had just uncovered the remains of a man lost to history for 100 years. Irvine had finally been found. The implications were staggering. For decades, climbers and historians had debated what became of Mallory and Irvine. Had they reached the summit before falling to their deaths? Had Irvine, carrying the camera that could hold the truth, been lost in the shifting ice all these years? Now, at last, there was an answer. At least, part of one. The discovery was bittersweet for Irvine's family. His great-niece, Julie Summers, who spent years piecing together his story, felt the weight of closure settle over her. "It's an object that belonged to him and has a bit of him in it," she said of the boot. "It tells the whole story about what probably happened." Summers believes Irvine's body was carried down by avalanches, crushed beneath the glacier's slow, relentless movement. DNA testing will confirm the remains' identity, but the message is already clear. After a century of silence, Everest has finally begun to give up its secrets. Yet, one question still lingers in the frigid air. Was the summit theirs before the mountain took them? Or does Everest still guard the final, elusive piece of the puzzle? It was July 30th, 1989, a day that would forever be etched into rodeo history. The Cheyenne Frontier Days finals were in full swing, the crowd roaring with anticipation as one of the sport's brightest stars prepared for his next ride. Lane Frost, just 25 years old, was already a legend, a world champion bull rider with a fearless spirit, a magnetic personality, and a future that seemed limitless. But no one in that arena could have known they were about to witness his final ride. Lane was born on October 12, 1963, in Lane, Oklahoma, raised in the heart of rodeo country. His father, Clyde, was a cowboy, but young Lane didn't take to the sport immediately. Something changed along the way, though. And once the fire was lit, there was no stopping him. By the late 80s, he had become one of the most electrifying names in rodeo. In 1987, he reached the peak of his career, winning the World Championship. The following year, he accomplished the impossible, conquering Red Rock, a bull that had never been successfully ridden for the full 8 seconds. Lane wasn't just a competitor. He was an icon, a hero to fans, and a friend to his fellow riders. But fate had other plans. That July day in 1989, the Wyoming sky hung heavy and gray, the air thick with the scent of damp dirt. Lane was up against a powerful, unpredictable bull named Taking Care of Business. As the gate flew open, Lane held firm, riding with the same unshakable confidence that had made him a champion. The crowd erupted as he made the 8-second mark, earning an impressive 85 points. But in rodeo, the danger doesn't end with the whistle. As Lane dismounted, disaster struck. He landed awkwardly in front of the bull. In a split second, the beast lunged forward, its horn striking Lane's ribs with devastating force. He stumbled, tried to regain his footing, then collapsed face first into the Wyoming dirt. The arena fell into a stunned silence. Dr. Skip Ross, the first responder, rushed to his side, but the injuries were catastrophic. A broken rib had punctured Lane's heart. For 90 desperate minutes, medical personnel fought to save him, but it was too late. Lane Frost, the cowboy who had stared down death time and time again, was gone. His death sent shockwaves through the rodeo world. His closest friends, including Cody Lambert and Tuff Hedeman, were devastated. Determined to honor his friend's memory, Cody created something that would change the sport forever. The protective vest that is now a standard in bull riding, a life-saving innovation born from tragedy. But Lane's legacy didn't end there. His story inspired a new generation of riders. J.B. Mauney, one of the greatest bull riders of all time, has often credited Lane as one of his biggest influences. His life was immortalized in the 1994 film 8 Seconds, with Luke Perry bringing his story to the big screen and introducing his legend to an even wider audience. For those who were there that day, for those who heard the gasp of the crowd and watched a legend fall, the memory of Lane Frost will never fade. His story is one of triumph and tragedy, of a man who lived fearlessly and rode until the very end. And in the heart of every bull rider who steps into the arena, Lane still rides on. On July 3, 2018, Aaron Gibbons set out on what should have been a peaceful family trip, a day of tradition, bonding, and quiet survival in the vast Arctic wilderness. But by nightfall, he would become a legend, a father who made the ultimate sacrifice in the face of one of nature's most terrifying predators. Aaron, 31, was no stranger to the wild. Born and raised in Arviat, Nunavut, he belonged to a people who had spent generations coexisting with the brutal forces of nature. Though he worked in a gold mine, his heart remained tied to his community's hunting traditions. On that fateful day, he took his children to Sentry Island, a remote Arctic outpost with windswept beaches and an abundance of wildlife. It was a chance to teach them the ways of their ancestors, to show them how to gather Arctic tern eggs, to respect the land, and to embrace the unforgiving beauty of the North. But nature doesn't follow a script. As the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the tundra, Aaron caught sight of something massive, something pale, something moving, a polar bear. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, blending into the barren landscape. Then it moved again, and this time it was coming straight for them. Everything changed in an instant. Aaron's instincts kicked in before fear could take hold. The bear was closing in, fast. He shouted for his children to run, his voice sharp, urgent, leaving no room for hesitation. They sprinted for the boat, scrambling over the rough terrain, their hearts hammering. But Aaron, he didn't run. He couldn't. He planted his feet and turned to face the beast. He knew what had to be done. This was no ordinary bear encounter. There was no time to scare it away, no time to grab a weapon. The predator was already locked onto its prey, and Aaron was the only thing standing between it and his children. The attack was brutal, a desperate struggle of flesh against claws, of a father's unbreakable love against one of nature's deadliest hunters. His children, safe aboard the boat, could only watch in horror as their father fought for his life, his final moments filled with sheer, unrelenting courage. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Aaron had given everything. The bear was eventually killed, but the damage had been done. The man who had once stood as a protector of his people, a skilled hunter, a devoted father, was gone. His body, torn and bloodied, was a devastating reminder of the dangers lurking in the Arctic wilderness. In Arviat, grief turned into outrage. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was part of a growing problem. Polar bears were getting bolder, venturing closer to human settlements. Some blamed climate change for forcing the bears further inland, while others pointed to Churchill, Manitoba, a nearby town famous for polar bear tourism. Had these guided tours, where people walked among the bears, desensitized the animals to humans? Had they lost their fear, turning them into silent stalkers of the North? Aaron's uncle, Gordy Kidpick, a respected elder, spoke out. He warned that if changes weren't made, more families would suffer, more lives would be lost. But even amid the anger, one truth remained undeniable. Aaron Gibbons had died a hero. His bravery was later recognized with Canada's Star of Courage, an honor for those who display extraordinary valor in the face of death, but no medal could bring him back. What he left behind was more than just sorrow. It was a legacy of selflessness, of love, of a father's instinct to protect at all costs, and it was a warning, a chilling reminder that in the battle between man and nature, nature never fights fair. Mount Everest is a place where ambition and the elements collide. It is where dreams are realized, but also where nightmares unfold. In May 1996, Everest claimed the lives of 8 climbers in one of the most infamous tragedies in mountaineering history. A blizzard roared across the slopes, trapping climbers in a desperate battle against time, exhaustion, and the unforgiving cold. Some would never make it down. What should have been the ultimate triumph turned into a chilling descent into chaos, a disaster that would expose the dangers of Everest's commercialization and haunt the survivors forever. May 10, 1996, the summit loomed above as climbers from multiple expeditions pushed forward, each step a test of will against the mountain's brutal conditions. The Adventure Consultants team, led by the experienced Rob Hall, and the Mountain Madness team, led by the charismatic Scott Fisher, were among those chasing their Everest dreams that day. But the mountain had other plans. The push to the summit was delayed. Traffic jams clogged the Hillary Step, a narrow, treacherous section just below the peak. Precious minutes slipped away. Oxygen levels dropped. The weather shifted, and then it struck. A storm, unlike anything they had prepared for, came raging down from the heavens, swallowing the upper slopes in darkness, whiteouts, and howling winds. The descent became a fight for survival. The wind screamed at over 70 miles per hour. Temperatures plunged to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 40 degrees Celsius. Visibility was non-existent. Climbers staggered blindly, lost in the void. Their oxygen tanks emptied, their bodies betrayed them. Rob Hall, an Everest veteran, was still high on the mountain, waiting for a struggling client, Doug Hansen. Hansen had run out of oxygen, his body failing him in the brutal altitude. Hall refused to leave him. He radioed base camp, his voice weakening with every word. He was trapped. Further down, Scott Fisher, known for his resilience, was in trouble. Fatigue, altitude sickness, and the elements were shutting his body down. He collapsed on the descent. His team tried to help him, but Everest had already made its decision. Meanwhile, another climber, Beck Weathers, had collapsed in the snow, left for dead. He lay frozen, unmoving, as the storm raged around him. Night fell, and the mountain took its victims. By the time the storm cleared, 8 climbers were dead. Rob Hall perished high on the South Col, still waiting for rescue that would never come. His final radio transmission was haunting, his last words to his pregnant wife, Jan Arnold, before the wind carried him into eternity. Scott Fisher never made it down either. His body remained on the mountain, a grim testament to Everest's merciless nature. Beck Weathers miraculously did not die. Despite being left for dead twice, his face frozen solid, his hands blackened by frostbite, he somehow woke up, stumbled through the snow, and survived. His story would become one of the most astonishing survival tales in mountaineering history. The disaster was a wake-up call. The world watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded. Everest had become a business, a tourist attraction for the wealthy and the ambitious. Did commercialization play a role in these deaths? Should leaders have turned back earlier? And could all of this have been prevented? The survivors told their stories. Journalist John Krakauer, who had been part of the doomed expedition, wrote Into Thin Air, a haunting account of the events that unfolded in the storm. Anatoly Bukriv, a guide from Mountain Madness, wrote The Climb, defending his decisions that night. Others, like Lou Kosishke and Graham Ratcliffe, revealed chilling details about weather warnings that had been ignored. But in the end, the mountain had the final word. More than 2 decades later, Everest still holds the bones of those who never made it back. Hall and Fisher remain on its slopes, frozen in time. Their fate serves as a reminder to those who dare to climb. Everest does not care how experienced you are, how much you have paid, or how badly you want to reach the top. It only asks one question: are you ready to pay the price? It was July 24th, 2007, in Salt Lake City, Utah. The air was thick with anticipation as the days of 47 Rodeo, one of the most prestigious events in the country, was in full swing. Among the riders that night was 19-year-old Tag Elliott, a rising star from Thatcher, Utah. At just 19, he had already made a name for himself. The 2006 Utah High School Rodeo champion, the second-place finisher at the National College Rodeo Finals, and now ranked 24th in the world as a professional. This ride wasn't just another challenge. It was an opportunity to climb higher, to prove he belonged with the best. But fate had other plans. Tag had drawn Werewolf, a fitting name for a bull that was more monster than beast. A hulking, 1,500-pound force of pure aggression, known for unpredictable movements and a vicious streak that sent even seasoned riders crashing to the dirt. This wasn't just a test of skill, it was survival. The tension in the arena was suffocating as Tag climbed onto Werewolf's back, gripping the bull rope with the confidence of a man who had spent years chasing this very moment. The seconds dragged, the crowd fell silent, and then the chute blasted open. Werewolf erupted into the arena like an unleashed demon, kicking and twisting with raw, uncontainable fury. Tag barely had time to react before, crack, a sickening impact. Werewolf's horn struck Tag with unrelenting force, smashing into the right side of his face. The blow was devastating. His eye socket shattered, his jaw snapped like brittle wood. Teeth flew from his mouth as his body went limp, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The crowd's roar turned into a horrified silence. For an agonizing moment, Tag lay motionless in the dirt. No movement, no sign of life. The rodeo clowns sprinted in, forming a protective shield around him, waving frantically to distract the raging bull. Other cowboys rushed in, eyes wide with fear, because they knew. They had seen bad wrecks before, but this was different. In the stands, a man bolted from his seat. Chris Haim, an off-duty ambulance driver, had seen enough injuries to recognize a life-threatening situation. His instincts took over. He ran for the arena, yelling for the paramedics to bring the ambulance closer. Every second counted. Tag was rushed to LDS Hospital, his condition growing worse with every mile. The damage was beyond anything the doctors had anticipated. Every bone on the right side of his face was broken. His jaw and eye socket were obliterated. Most of his teeth were gone. And during emergency surgery, the nightmare worsened. Tag's heart stopped. Twice, doctors fought to bring him back. Twice, he hovered on the brink of death. For days, he drifted between unconsciousness and unbearable pain. He had no memory of the accident, no recollection of the moment his world changed forever. When he finally opened his eyes, reality came crashing down. His face was shattered, his body weak, his career hanging by a thread. The road ahead was brutal. 20 months, more than 20 surgeries. The doctors rebuilt his face piece by piece, but nothing could heal the deeper wounds, the doubts, the whispers that maybe, just maybe, this was the end of his bull riding days. But giving up, that was never an option. "This is my job. This is how I make a living," Tag said, his voice unwavering. He wasn't searching for a way out. He was waiting for one thing, the green light to ride again. His family never pressured him, never asked him to walk away. They stood by him through every surgery, every grueling day of recovery, every moment of pain. And when the time came, when the doctors finally cleared him to return to the sport that nearly took his life, Tag did the only thing he knew how to do. He got back on the bull. By 2009, he cautiously re-entered competition, determined to reclaim his place among the elite. He trained relentlessly, pushing his body beyond its limits, proving to himself and the world that he was still the cowboy he had always been. Even after an arm injury later slowed him down, Tag remained tied to the rodeo world, working on his ranch in Idaho, still a cowboy at heart. In April 2002, Carolyn Stuttle, a kind-hearted and ambitious 19-year-old from York, England, was nearing the end of her gap-year adventure in Australia. Traveling with her close friend, Sarah Holliday, Caroline had spent months exploring the country's iconic landmarks. Their journey was almost complete, with Bundaberg, a quiet town in Queensland, being one of their final stops before heading home. But Caroline would never return to her family. Like countless young travelers, she had worked hard to save for her trip, taking shifts at Pizza Hut and making detailed plans for the adventure of a lifetime before starting her studies in criminal psychology. She dreamed of helping others, eager to begin the next chapter of her life. On April 10, 2002, Caroline stepped out alone to make a phone call to her boyfriend in England. As she walked back to her caravan park, her path crossed with Ian Privet, a 32-year-old drifter and drug addict. Desperate for money to fuel his addiction, Privet's desperation turned violent. He spotted Caroline and attempted to snatch her handbag. She fought back, refusing to let go. Determined to get what he wanted, Privet's aggression escalated. He forced Caroline over the railing of the bridge they were standing on, sending her plummeting 32 feet to the ground below. The fall left her fatally injured, her life stolen for the trivial sum of 180 pounds, a meaningless amount in exchange for a bright future extinguished too soon. When police arrived, Caroline's body lay beneath the bridge, her belongings gone. News of her murder quickly spread, shattering her family's world and stunning the community back in York. Investigators pursued leads, but Privet remained unidentified and the case grew cold. Months later, an unexpected breakthrough emerged. While serving time for an unrelated crime, Privet reportedly confessed to Caroline's murder. His chilling admission gained credibility when authorities discovered a handwritten message scrawled on a bench near his hostel. "I threw the girl off the bridge. I am sorry." The confession gave police the break they needed, leading to Privet's arrest and trial in 2004. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the jury found him guilty. Judge Peter Doney sentenced him to life in prison, condemning his actions and the tragic loss of an innocent young woman. For Caroline's grieving family, the verdict provided some relief, but no true closure. Knowing Privet was behind bars could not erase the pain of her absence. Determined to honor her memory, Caroline's family founded Caroline's Rainbow Foundation, a charity dedicated to educating young travelers about safety and awareness while abroad. Her brother, Richard Stuttle, has continued the foundation's mission, ensuring Caroline's adventurous spirit and kindness live on through their work. However, in 2020, Privet was released from prison, reopening the wounds her loss had inflicted. Richard spoke out about the lifelong impact of Caroline's murder, stating that while Privet's life sentence ended, theirs would last forever. Mount Everest is a place of dreams, where climbers push their limits against the world's highest peak. But beneath the towering heights and breathtaking vistas lies a silent killer, one that strikes without warning, without mercy. And on April 5, 1970, it claimed 6 lives in a single devastating moment. They were Sherpas, experienced, strong, and fearless. For generations, their people had carried the ambitions of foreign climbers on their backs, navigating the mountain's most treacherous passages. That day, they were working on a seemingly straightforward mission, assisting the production of The Man Who Skied Down Everest, a documentary about Japanese alpinist Yuichiro Miura's bold attempt to ski from the mountain's upper slopes. It was meant to be a film about human triumph. Instead, it became the backdrop for unspeakable loss. The Khumbu Icefall is a nightmare, frozen in time. A chaotic maze of towering ice blocks, bottomless crevasses, and unstable seracs. The men knew its dangers well. Each step had to be calculated, every movement deliberate, but no amount of experience could have saved them from what happened next. Without warning, the mountain roared to life. A massive serac, an unstable column of glacial ice, broke loose from above, crashing down in an unstoppable cascade of destruction. In an instant, the 6 Sherpas were swallowed by ice and debris, their bodies vanishing into Everest's unforgiving depths. No chance to run, no time to scream, just silence in the aftermath, as if the mountain itself had closed its grip around them. 4 days later, as their deaths still hung heavy in the air, Everest struck again. Another Sherpa, Kayak Tsering, was killed by falling ice while working on a separate Japanese expedition. 7 lives lost in the span of a week. 7 men who had risked everything, only to become nameless victims to the world's deadliest mountain. And yet, the expedition continued. Just weeks after the tragedy, Yuichiro Miura strapped on his skis and made history, becoming the first person to descend Everest on skis. The documentary was completed. It won an Academy Award. But for the families of the Sherpas who perished, there was no glory, only grief. Their sacrifice, overshadowed by the spectacle of Miura's achievement, was a footnote in history. Even now, more than 50 years later, the Khumbu Icefall remains Everest's deadliest passage. It has claimed countless lives since that fateful day in 1970. Including the 16 Sherpas who perished in the 2014 avalanche. Yet few remember the men who were lost in the making of The Man Who Skied Down Everest. The mountain never forgets, and neither should we. It was 1995 in Las Vegas, a night that would go down in rodeo history for all the wrong reasons. Inside the MGM Grand, the energy crackled with anticipation. Thousands of fans packed the arena, waiting to witness a battle between man and beast. But they had no idea they were about to see one of the most terrifying moments the sport had ever known. Tuff Hedeman, a name that struck both respect and awe in the rodeo world, was at the peak of his career. A 3-time world champion, fearless and relentless. He had faced the toughest bulls and always found a way to come out on top. But this night, his opponent wasn't just any bull, it was Bodacious. The name alone sent chills down the spine of every bull rider. Bodacious was no ordinary animal, he was a monster, a living nightmare wrapped in muscle and fury. Nicknamed the world's most dangerous bull, he was notorious for his explosive power and a deadly trick up his sleeve. Instead of just bucking riders off, Bodacious had mastered a devastating move, launching them forward, only to whip his massive head up at the last second, slamming his skull into their faces with bone-shattering force. No rider had ever walked away from him unscathed. Tuff knew what he was up against. He had drawn Bodacious in the short go-round, and the entire arena buzzed with nervous excitement. They knew this was more than just a ride, it was a showdown. A war between an unstoppable cowboy and an untamed beast. As Hedeman climbed onto the bull, gripping his rope tightly, he leaned forward, trying to stay ahead of Bodacious's lethal moves. The chute gate burst open, and then disaster. Bodacious exploded out, twisting violently, and before Hedeman could react, the bull snapped his head up with horrifying precision. The impact was brutal. A sickening crack echoed through the arena as Bodacious's skull slammed into Hedeman's face. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. Others stood frozen in shock. Hedeman crumpled to the dirt. Blood poured from his face, pooling beneath him. The sheer force of the hit had obliterated nearly every bone in his face. His cheekbones were shattered, his nose broken, his jaw barely holding together. And yet, in a moment that defied all logic, Hedeman did the unthinkable. He stood up. His face was a mess of blood and agony, his vision blurred, but pure adrenaline carried him forward. He refused to be carried out. Instead, he walked out of the arena on his own 2 feet. A warrior who had just survived an encounter with death itself. Only later, as he lay on a gurney, did the full extent of his injuries become clear. The doctors who examined him were stunned. At first, they thought he had been shot. His face required 2 grueling surgeries, 13 hours under the knife, and 6 titanium plates just to hold the bones together. The pain was unbearable, the recovery long and brutal. He lost 25 pounds, and when his young son Lane saw him, he didn't recognize his own father. Only the sound of his voice confirmed that the broken man before him was still Tuff Hedeman. And yet, incredibly, this wasn't even his first brush with near death. In 1993, he had been temporarily paralyzed after a brutal fall at the National Finals Rodeo. That injury had cost him an entire season, but in 1995 he came roaring back, ranking 3rd in the world. Even after his face had been destroyed, he refused to quit. Just 6 weeks after his surgery, Hedeman was back in Las Vegas for the National Finals Rodeo. The pain was still fresh, but so was his determination. He rode 5 of the 10 bulls he faced, a feat that would have been impossible for anyone else. And then, in the 5th round, fate tested him once more. He drew Bodacious. The arena fell silent. Every eye was on him. Would he dare to climb on the bull that had nearly ended his life? As the chute opened, Bodacious charged out, alone. Hedeman had made his decision. He would not ride. The crowd erupted, not in disappointment but in respect. They understood. They had seen the carnage, the brutality of what Bodacious could do, and they knew that sometimes even the toughest cowboys had to make the hardest choice. His story remains one of the most harrowing tales in rodeo history, a reminder of just how dangerous this sport can be and just how tough some men truly are. In May 1996, what should have been a peaceful hiking trip through Virginia's Shenandoah National Park turned into a nightmare, one so chilling that it would haunt the region for decades. Julie Williams, 24, and her partner Laura Loie Winans, 26, set out on an adventure, unaware that something, or someone, was lurking in the wilderness. waiting to turn their dream getaway into a scene of unimaginable horror. The couple, both passionate nature lovers, had come to Shenandoah for a much-needed retreat. Julie was preparing to start a new job in Vermont on June 1st, a fresh chapter in her life. Instead, that date would mark the horrifying end of a frantic search, one that uncovered a crime so brutal it left even seasoned investigators shaken. Julie and Loie entered the park on May 19th, accompanied by their golden retriever, Taj. They followed the White Canyon Trail, but heavy rain forced them to change their route. They registered for additional permits and were last seen on May 24th, when a park ranger gave them a ride. Their final campsite lay near a secluded stream off the Appalachian Trail, just a short distance from the popular Skyland Lodge. It seemed safe, but safety, they would soon learn, was an illusion. For days, no one realized anything was wrong. Then, on May 31st, Julie's father, Thomas Williams, grew uneasy. His daughter should have called about her new job. When she didn't, he reported her missing. Park rangers quickly located Julie and Loie's car near Skyland Lodge, but something was off. The couple was nowhere in sight. Then, a chilling clue, Taj, their dog, was found wandering alone, confused and distressed. Something had happened. Something terrible. The next day, searchers pushed deeper into the wilderness, and that's when they found it. The campsite was eerily silent, but as they moved closer, the truth revealed itself, a scene so gruesome it would stay with them forever. Julie and Loie's bodies lay close together, bound and gagged, their final moments marked by sheer terror. They had suffered. The brutality of the attack spoke of calculated evil, of a predator who had stalked them in the night. Investigators descended on the scene, but the remote location and lack of evidence made the case daunting. They searched for answers, piecing together the couple's last days. A recovered camera showed their joy-filled adventure up until May 24th, the last day they were seen alive. Then, darkness swallowed their story. The investigation led authorities to a man named Daryl David Rice. He had a disturbing history, a documented hatred for women, and had been spotted in Shenandoah around the time of the murders. Restraints were found in his vehicle. He had even made chilling remarks about Julie and Loie's relationship. Prosecutors believed they had their man. But then, in 2003, everything collapsed. DNA from the crime scene didn't match Rice. It didn't match the victims either. The case, once seemingly airtight, fell apart in an instant. The real killer was still out there. For nearly 3 decades, Julie and Loie's families lived in torment, haunted by the unanswered questions. Who had been watching them? Who had crept into their campsite that night, tying them up, silencing their screams and snuffing out their young lives? Then, in 2024, science finally caught up to the truth. A breakthrough in DNA technology led investigators to a new name, Walter Leo Jackson. A convicted serial molester, Jackson had a history of brutal attacks, but he would never face justice for what he did to Julie and Loie. He had died in prison in 2018. The discovery was bittersweet. The families had answers but no justice. The true monster had been hiding in plain sight all along, and the chilling question remains: how many others did he leave behind in the darkness? Mount Everest has always been a mountain of dreams, but for some, it is a graveyard. Hannelore Schmatz was no ordinary climber. She was a fearless adventurer, a woman who refused to let the dangers of the world's highest peak deter her from reaching its summit. And in 1979, she did just that. But Everest was not finished with her. What was supposed to be a moment of triumph turned into a slow, merciless death in the thin air of the death zone. For years, her body remained there, eyes open, hair frozen in the wind, watching as others passed by, a grim warning of what happens when the mountain decides it will not let you go. Hannelore Schmatz and her husband Gerhard lived for the mountains. They had climbed peaks across the world, conquering summits that few would dare attempt. Everest, however, was the ultimate challenge. In the fall of 1979, they set out on the expedition that would change everything. The climb was brutal. A relentless blizzard battered the team as they made their way up the mountain. They pushed through exhaustion, cold, and uncertainty. When Gerhard and his group reached the top on October 1st, They descended safely, but Hannelore was still waiting for her chance. On October 2nd, she made her move. Against her husband's warnings that the weather was turning dangerous, she and her team set off for the summit at dawn. The wind howled, the snow thickened, but they pressed on. Hours later, at around 1:30 p.m., Hannelore Schmatz stood at the top of the world. She had done it, but Everest does not reward ambition, it punishes it. Descending from the summit, exhaustion set in fast. Hannelore and her teammate, Swiss-American climber Ray Genet, found themselves struggling against the brutal cold. Their bodies were failing, their oxygen was running out. Night was falling, and they were still in the death zone, where human life cannot last for long. The Sherpa guides pleaded with them to keep moving. Staying put meant death, but Hannelore and Genet were too weak. They made the fateful decision to bivouac at 28,000 feet, 8,500 meters, exposed to the full force of Everest's wrath. Sungdaer Sherpa, one of their guides, stayed with them, refusing to abandon them to the night. By morning, Genet was dead. The cold had taken him. Hannelore, barely clinging to life, forced herself to stand. With Sungdaer's help, she tried to descend. Then, just 330 feet, 100 meters above Camp 4, she collapsed. Her body had nothing left to give. Her last words were barely a whisper. "Water, water," and then she was gone. Sungdaer had no choice. He left her there and descended alone, frostbitten and broken. He survived, but barely. The mountain had taken its price. Hannelore's body remained exactly where she fell, frozen in place, her backpack still strapped to her, her eyes open as if she were still watching the climbers passing by. For years, she became a landmark, a chilling, silent warning to those who dared to challenge Everest. Climbers who took the southern route described her as a sinister guard, a ghostly presence on the mountain. Then, in 1984, Everest finally reclaimed her. A powerful storm swept her body away, dragging her down the Kangshung face, where she was lost forever. The wind erased her like she had never been there at all. Yet, her story remains. Gerhard Schmatz returned home without his wife. He had reached the summit, but at a terrible cost. "The team came home," he said, "but I alone without my beloved Hannelore." Even today, over 200 bodies remain on Everest, frozen in time, just like she was. Everest does not forgive, Everest does not forget, and those who climb it must always remember the price of ambition. On March 24, 2000, under the bright lights of the arena in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the air was electric with anticipation. The professional bull riders' Bud Light Cup Series was in full swing, a brutal clash between the world's best cowboys and the fiercest bulls ever bred. Among those who stepped into the ring that night was Glenn Keeley, a 30-year-old Canadian bull rider from Alberta. He wasn't just another competitor, he was one of the best, ranked 9th in the world by points and 6th by earnings. With over a decade of experience, Glenn was at the height of his career, chasing greatness one 8-second ride at a time. But on this night, fate had placed him against Promised Land, a force of nature disguised as a bull. Promised Land was no ordinary opponent. The 1999 PBR Bull of the Year, he was a terrifying blend of power and unpredictability, a 2,000-pound juggernaut with no mercy for any man who dared mount him. Countless riders had failed to last against him, sent flying in mere seconds. But Glenn wasn't one to back down. He had faced dangerous bulls before. He was ready. The arena fell into a tense hush as Glenn settled onto the beast's back, his grip tightening around the bull rope. The gate exploded open, and chaos erupted. Promised Land launched forward like a cannonball, bucking violently, twisting mid-air, throwing his full weight into the fight. Glenn held on, muscles straining, his body moving with the bull's erratic movements. The seconds stretched, 4, 5, 6, until suddenly, with a savage twist, Promised Land sent him flying. Glenn crashed hard into the dirt, the impact jarring but not unfamiliar. He had taken countless falls before. He tried to roll away to get back to his feet, but there was no time. Promised Land's massive hind legs came down like a sledgehammer, crushing Glenn's chest. A gasp swept through the crowd. The moment hung in the air, heavy and unbearable. Glenn lay still. Then, against all odds, he moved. The audience erupted in stunned relief as Glenn, battered and broken, somehow stood up. Assisted by the medical team, he walked out of the arena, even managing a joke with the staff. To those watching, it looked like just another brutal fall, another close call for a tough-as-nails cowboy. But behind the scenes, something was terribly wrong. By the time Glenn reached the University of New Mexico hospital, the situation had turned dire. He had suffered devastating internal injuries. His liver was lacerated, his body fighting a losing battle against the damage. At first, his vitals remained stable, offering a fleeting glimmer of hope. But as doctors rushed him into surgery, the horrifying truth became clear. The damage was far worse than anyone had realized. The bleeding was uncontrollable. Before the clock struck 10 p.m., Glenn Keeley was gone. The news spread like wildfire. A man in his prime, a cowboy chasing his dreams, was suddenly no more. It was the first high-profile bull riding death in North America in 6 years, a grim reminder of the unforgiving nature of the sport. Glenn's family knew these risks all too well. Years earlier, his brother Jason had been gored by a bull, left in a coma for 2 weeks, and yet Glenn had never hesitated. Bull riding wasn't just a sport for him. It was his purpose, his passion, his legacy. He had made a promise to himself, to his family, that 2000 would be his final year in competition. He was planning to walk away. But on that night in Albuquerque, Glenn Keeley rode one last time. The rodeo continued the next day, but the atmosphere had changed. The riders wore memorial stickers on their vests, a silent tribute to the fallen cowboy. A press conference was held, addressing the tragic accident. Dr. Tandy Freeman, who had treated Glenn, delivered the devastating truth. His vitals were stable until surgeons saw the extent of the damage. By then, it was too late. He bled to death before they could save him. But Glenn's name was not forgotten. Today, his legacy endures. The Glenn Keeley Memorial Bull Riding event was established in his honor, alongside a scholarship fund to help young athletes chase their dreams. Every year, at the PBR World Finals, the best Canadian bull rider receives the Glenn Keeley Award, ensuring that his courage, resilience, and fighting spirit live on. Because Glenn Keeley wasn't just a cowboy, he was a legend. The Carpathian Mountains, rugged, breathtaking, and untamed. For 19-year-old Maria Diana, this remote wilderness was meant to be an escape, a well-earned reward after the grueling months of high school exams. But as she set off on that July day in 2024, she had no idea she was walking straight into a nightmare. Maria had always loved the mountains, the crisp air, the endless greenery, the thrill of adventure. It called to her. That summer, she decided to explore the Yepi May Trail near Brasov with her boyfriend, eager to see the famed Spumwassa waterfall. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Her pregnant mother begged her not to go, her warnings heavy with unease. "Be careful," her mother had urged. "These mountains are dangerous." Maria had just smiled. "Nothing bad will happen." She was wrong. At first, the hike was peaceful. The two moved along the winding trail, surrounded by towering trees and the distant murmur of the waterfall. But deep in the wilderness, they were not alone. A shadow moved in the undergrowth. Something was watching them. Then, a snapping branch, a low, guttural growl. The brown bear emerged, massive and relentless. It locked eyes on Maria and her boyfriend, its powerful body tense, its breath heavy. And then, it charged. Panic took over. Maria and her boyfriend scrambled, trying to call for help as the beast closed in. Maria managed to dial emergency services, her voice trembling as she described the horror unfolding before her. "It's coming. Please, please hurry." Her boyfriend called too, but no one could reach them in time. Then, a scream. The bear struck with brutal force. its claws tearing into Maria's leg. She fought, but the beast was too strong, too fast. It dragged her from the path, pulling her toward the trees. Her boyfriend, helpless, could only watch in horror. Maria's screams filled the forest as the bear's powerful jaws clamped down. Then, with a final, violent shake, it threw her over the edge. She plummeted 400 feet down a steep cliff. The silence that followed was deafening. When the Salvamont Prahova rescue team arrived, they found the bear still there, prowling around Maria's lifeless body. It had tasted blood, and it wasn't finished. Rescuers had no choice. A gunshot rang out. The bear collapsed, but the damage was done. Maria lay broken at the base of the cliff, her body covered in claw marks, deep bites, evidence of the brutal attack. There had been no chance of survival. Maria's death sent shockwaves through Romania. Her boyfriend, shaken beyond words, struggled with unbearable guilt. "I should have done more," he told reporters. "It should have been me." Even experienced rescuers were shaken. Dan Banu, the head of the response team, described it as one of the most horrifying attacks he had seen in over a decade. The tragedy sparked a national debate. Romania, home to Europe's largest brown bear population outside Russia, had seen a rise in bear encounters. The government reacted swiftly, approving a controversial measure to cull nearly 500 bears. But was it the right answer? Environmentalists argued that human expansion and irresponsible tourism were pushing bears closer to people. Killing them, they warned, wouldn't solve the deeper problem. Maria Diana's story is more than just a tragedy. It's a warning. The wilderness is beautiful. It is breathtaking. But above all, it is wild. And in the wild, we are never truly in control.